Join us for the Criterion Institute podcast as Joy Anderson, a global thought leader in business and social change, leads us through a series of discussions, interviews, frameworks, rants, and reframes that will help you better understand how to use finance as a tool for transformative systems change.
I am Joy Anderson, and this is the Criterion Institute podcast. This episode contains a conversation with one of my favorite people, Elizabeth Howard. You know, when you meet those people and you think, dang, just like wicked smart, and wouldn't it be cool if we could just have like 24 hours to talk nonstop? Elizabeth Howard has made a mark in investment design in Africa, focusing on localization and ways to build investment structures that work in context. She's done a ton on crowdfunding, and we had the honor of funding a report called Local Capital, the Key to the Emergence of African Women Fund Managers. This was funded as a part of the RISE program supported by Global Affairs Canada. And so one of the reasons that Elizabeth was able to produce this report is her role in founding Women in African Investments, the WAY Group, which has over 280 female investment professionals across the continent. And in that, she's been advocating for the leadership of women, but even more advocating for appropriate design for women fund managers. Enjoy.
At Criterion Institute, our partners understand that shifting deeply entrenched power dynamics can't be done with a single training session or report. Our most successful engagements have spanned years, not months, and involve close collaboration within one of our 6 systems change approaches. We're currently in the midst of advancing some remarkable change around how power is seen and addressed in our financial systems. We hope our work sparks your thinking about what might be possible together, and we invite you to have a further conversation about how the change we are creating today aligns with your impact goals.
Hey, Elizabeth. So one of my favorite parts about talking to you is I think we have the same general level of exhaustion that intersects with the things that we think are not working in the world. And so I love our coffees because they're not blah, blah, blah. They're oh, this is so tiring. And so it's a little snarky, and I love your snark, Elizabeth. So just anybody listening to this, this conversation is going to tip towards snark because that is Elizabeth Howard in all of her full greatness. And so anyway, just a full warning for people who are listening to this, we're going to tip a little snarky, and we're both just a little exhausted with the world. Maybe the rest of you are as well. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Accurate introduction.
So, I've known about you from a distance for a long time, but I've really liked the last couple of years, has it been, that we've sort of started to hang out a little bit more. And maybe we'll start with this report, because I still think it's funny when we met up in Nairobi, I think it was, we're both at this gathering, and I realized that Criterion, through the Arise program, had actually funded the report that you were presenting on. But I so never think of us as a foundation. So I was like, what? You're like, I need to change the credit on this report to name you as a funder. I'm like, no, we're just a broke nonprofit. We're not a funder. But I really am glad that these Arise grants that we did with Global Affairs Canada were able to support this work. So what was that research? Maybe just talk a little bit about what that research was that you were trying to solve for in that moment.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for funding it. I'm glad we got your logo on there in the end. So yeah,
that is what actually defines all these things, is like, are the logos in the right place? Part of the exhaustion. Carry on.
Yeah, so we were really grateful to get this grant because in the Women in African Investments Group, which is a network of 300 senior female investment professionals who are all focused on Africa. And we knew that around half of our members were what we'd call emerging fund managers, right? Most of them being sort of domiciled, located on the continent. We knew from our conversations in the Way Group, since 2017, that getting these women into a position where they could reach first close, which is the term for when you get to a certain target of fundraising of your fund.
It's the pinnacle of success.
Yes.
I mean, that is
nothing
else matters in life. Having a child, being first close, that is defines success in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. That this was just really challenging, and these were back in the days when I think we could literally count on one hand the number of women-led funds in Africa who had reached the pinnacle. We something that just kept coming up was, oh well, they don't have the track record. Women don't have a track record. We're like, okay, if track record is so important, let's look at why I can't raise track record. And the track record basically for a DFI or for an institutional funder is the process that the woman has been on, which shows that she can get money into a deal and get money out of a deal, ideally with commercial returns. That's what track record means. And some of the women who, were able to sort of do track record building deals was sort of still coming up against difficulties translating these track records. Sort of, you're like, well, you've done a $50,000 debt deal, which is not the same thing as a $1 million equity deal, and therefore your track record does not meet our track record requirements. And there was just a lot of conversation around that.
I'm always just say that, like, that one piece just like pisses me off to no end, because it's like you get the track record and they're like, no, not that track record. I'm sorry, that's a different track record.
I know, and you didn't do the deal with the partner that you have on your fund today, so that doesn't count yet. I mean, there's a lot of unsaid things, right? It just the whole kind of PPLP, matchmaking process is really difficult. There's so many elements of psychology and pattern finding and seeking and matching that goes on there. So it's not only about track record only, but the problem is that a lot of our members were not really speaking about how they were going about building this track record. And so this report helped us just to go and interview a whole bunch of women in the industry to understand what they were doing. And what we found was that local capital mobilization, which is a term for going to your community or your family or your professional network or individuals and convincing them to pool money together to do a deal. For some women, they might have a great network of very high net worth individuals and they pull it that way. Others don't have a lot of rich, friends and family or connections, and they would go to their communities or just be selling their investment opportunity quite differently and maybe structuring their investment opportunity quite differently. I'll give an example in Senegal of a woman who was pitching investment in a local bakery chain, which had immediate resonance because there wasn't a bakery in that town, and so people would pool capital to build that business. So many different ways of building this famed track record. And this report was so great because we learned so much more than we expected to about local capital.
And so in the end, it's the because the catch-22, right, is to get capital, and I think this is maybe diving into some of the things that you've figured out in the report, or just that we've all in hanging around in the world figured out about some of these disconnects. But the things that we're working to engage informal or family-based or connection-based or community-based capital, which is what everybody says we need to be moving towards, right? You need to be drawing capital from your context and prove that what you're doing is relevant to your context. But the challenge, and this is what I I heard you say this was the first time I heard you describe this report, and I was like, yeah, that's it. Is because the track record trajectory that most people are moving towards is what's defined by development finance institutions. And so they're going on this track record trajectory that is the kind of track record those folks want. And if they do the local capital mobilization where they're actually working in their communities, bringing this together, then they're not doing the right kind of local capital mobilization, and they build structures that don't match what DFIs want. Or as soon as people start having conversations with DFIs, all the relationships that got built locally no longer work because it has to be in US currency, et cetera, et cetera. Did I kind of get that right?
Yeah, I think that's more or less right. The starting point of a women fund manager and her understanding of what a fund manager even is will probably determine how she views track record. Yeah, so I guess the fact that our industry is so kind of DFI centric already kind of excludes a lot of interesting conversations that we might otherwise have. The term fund manager, the term fund means something so well defined now and so rigid, right, for DFIs that it's hard for a lot of women to believe that there could be other sort of acceptable forms of building a track record or sort of non-traditional or alternative or innovative fund structures that are still valid, still legitimate, and still actually investable by institutional capital. So and this was a challenge, right? It's almost stigmatized to talk about building a track record by mobilizing local capital. It's not something you would talk about when you go to sort of AFSIC in London. Be like, well, raise capital from my community to do this small deal. But here's my private equity fund for $75 million, and it's going to be incorporated in Mauritius. Don't worry, it's not going to be incorporated in Dakar. And we have these sort of high caliber, institutional backers, etc. It's just there's a two different worlds that I think women have to straddle, and it's really, really difficult.
And it leads to design problems, right? Like we're in a conversation now with a fund manager, or we're in conversations now with somebody building an investment vehicle, and part of the conversation we've been having for about a year is design what you actually need. And what keeps coming up in that is, and because I think the real value of this investment vehicle is that it's grounded in trust. This leader has a ton of trust in her community. She's been investing in her community for a decade and has she believes she can move deals through really quickly because she has an existing pipeline. But all the LPs or others that she's talking to want her to formalize her structure, right? They want her to bring in experts. They want her to have a investment team and a trust thingy-bob and all of these things that will formalize her in structure, but also make it way more expensive. And I keep looking at this and saying the value of what this woman was doing is that she knows her community and she's trusted, and so capital will move quickly. But we're going to build all of these structures to make sure that capital moves safely, but not safe for the community, safe for the outside investor who doesn't know that community. And we've now undermined the very value. So then what we'll say is the fund's not sustainable because she doesn't have the fund size that she needs to be able to make the whole thing work. And I'm like, but she had it before, and we might have been the ones who, effed it up.
That's exactly it. I mean, I think that experience has been repeated over and over and over in the lives of half the women in the Women in African Investments group. That's exactly it. As soon as you need to move from the DFI incompatible universe to the DFI compatible universe, you rapidly find out that you can't do the same type of deal. Now, some women are okay with that. They're like, cool, I want to do a bigger deal anyway because the fees are higher and whatever. Some people are not okay with that because they got into this industry to create impact in the communities. And they want to be able to continue doing potentially a smaller size deal. They want to be able to accompany the entrepreneur for a longer time period. They want to be able to provide the finance on different terms. They want to be able to provide multiple different investment instruments at different points in the life cycle, not only of the portfolio company, but the entrepreneur. And they might also want, to keep the wealth in the country,
Right.
and
In the currency, say.
Yeah, they don't want to have the pressure of managing currency fluctuations be either put onto them, or the cost of it be put onto them, or ultimately onto the portfolio companies, because someone's going to pay the price of the fluctuations. And let's be honest, like, no one can afford the hedging instruments that are out there. And like you said, the economics are incredibly sensitive. The getting money into companies in Africa is just a very, very cost sensitive thing, and we can speak for hours about the cost of this famous term, investment readiness and due diligence. But yeah, as long as it is defined on other sort of foreign standards, it's going to probably knock the economics out, right? And the deal size goes up, and then boom, we've got exclusion.
And so DFIs are just like in the midst of this, DFIs are trying to solve this problem ostensibly by then building things like fund manager accelerators, right? And things that will enable people to get into their pipeline. I think one of the things, and I know you've got we've all got some challenges with how those accelerators then channel people into what the LPs want and away from what the communities want. Sometimes, not all of them do it. And I also think at some level, DFIs are not, well, I don't know. I'm not a big person to like put out the evil spectrum or something. I think part of the challenge is DFIs should be, and I know you've got a lot of feelings about this as well, in a market structure that has many layers between them and what would be local capital that then could be parts of that could be rolled up into something that would work for a DFI. I think part of the problem part of the way I see it is the problem is the dominance of the DFIs. It's not the DFIs in and of themselves. Like what they're doing could be okay. It's that it's perceived as the only option. Is that wrong? Is it bad in and of itself, or is it just bad in a context of a limited set of options?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I mean, I remember a decade ago, it did feel like the only game in town was to get a DFI, but it's like a problem that they created themselves because of the economics issue. If you have a traditional fund structure, 220 USD incorporated in, I don't know, another place outside of the continent, you have to have $100 million size fund, or 75 million or something. Otherwise, the economics just don't work. So who's going to provide that type of money? Only DFIs. So it's kind of a circular problem. Government money, political money is really kind of tenuous. We've just seen a complete implosion of all kind of norms in the space of the last year. And so I think our mindsets are shifting away from this only game in town mentality. And perhaps the problem is that we just didn't, as an ecosystem, figure out how to create another universe, build another set of options. People are only talking now really seriously about local capital mobilization.
And that is increasing swiftly.
Yes. Yeah. So, thank you, Trump. Again, I don't know.
No, that's not that we don't need to do that. I feel the sentiment, but as an American, I'm not willing to thank him for anything. But I think in that, and that's where your paper I think is super clear of sort of looking at the sort of greenhouse versus red circle, and the red circle are us going after DFIs to say we're in the box of the things that are DFI fundable. And then there is a whole other world that we don't look at, that where new things, and I think we've been in this rant a little bit because it's a real rant, like the sort of ways that the design problems. I mean, this is global. This is not in any way just in Africa, but the design problems around building investment vehicles that actually work for communities versus only work for a limited type of investor. I'm not suggesting you should ever build an investment vehicle that doesn't work for investors. There are just more kinds of investors than people imagine, right? And so we get to play a little bit more right now on some of the things that you're working to really to solve that design process, to really stimulate. And I think, you're known as one of the people within Gender Lens Investing who's really pushing that design problem. And so what is working? Like what's emerging that works?
It's a fascinating discovery process. Like I was saying before, we know a lot about some forms of local capital mobilization on the continent in what people in studies call informal savings groups, chamas, susus, stokvels, etc. We know that there are billions of dollars being managed by those groups, and that's one kind of bucket of local capital. We know a bit about pension funds, and there's a lot of work on trying to change the policy environment to incentivize them to invest in what policy people in Africa called venture capital and private equity, which again, is just repeating the same kind of design problem imported from Western frameworks. But then there's this kind of other universe of money that's out there where you only really know that it's there until you see a proof of like supply matching demand. And so you'll get a local investment leader who will have started her journey, maybe as a sort of management consultant or someone in close proximity to SMEs and really deeply understands SMEs, builds relationships with the entrepreneurs, and then eventually tries to help them raise money. And she'll learn so much about it. She'll be like, well, I'd love to become a fund manager. I'd love to be able to invest. And she'll start going into the community and saying, well, these are my companies. These are how we're, investing in them in return. And then kind of building up relationships where people eventually get into a cadence of investing. And debt finance is very popular because it's smaller amounts of money. And the maturities and the sort of underlying assets can be pretty broad, right? In Nigeria, there's a whole lot of success stories with agri-tech platforms going out and building up pipelines of viable agricultural investment opportunities with sort of like 3 to 6 month horizons, local currency debt products based off on mobilizing local capital from individuals. In Uganda, you've got successful models, and in Mauritius too, with raising capital from individuals and matching it with working capital products, basic working capital products. You've also got a lot of examples, I think in the report, we speak about quite a few of them, of angel funds. Right? So these are kind of investment vehicles which have been funded to, around $500,000, even $1 million with what we call high net worth individuals. And these are structures where you just simply see that, there was appetite from those people for that product. And for that company, right? For that underlying sort of portfolio company or asset. And that's information. That's real information. And this is what became possible because that capital came in local currency. It came on those terms, and it came with this investment horizon. That kind of base of information is growing as we have more opportunities to support the women who are doing it, right? We understand a lot about the economics. Like we said, it's a very, very difficult space to play in. And how these intermediaries are actually making it work. And there's a lot of technology involved. There's a lot of sort of new approaches to dealing with individuals in greater sizes. We don't have nearly the same sort of diversity of products that you have in the US, for example, or in the UK, that really support local capital mobilization at scale. We don't have the regulatory frameworks that incentivize it. And we've got this huge risk that if we do put regulations in place, that again, they just knock the economics out with inappropriate compliance requirements or onerous compliance requirements. So that's kind of the report kind of opens up a new scope of work that we're grateful to be able to tackle now with the support of MasterCard Foundation. And so thankfully we finally were able to write a report with recommendations that we're actually being able to implement now.
While it's complicated and there could be unintended consequences, the answer is about designing those vehicles to a certain extent, standardizing them so people understand them or make them more visible, and then in theory, at least make them allowable within a regulatory framework that hopefully doesn't then destroy them. And I do, as you were describing those things, it's one of the characteristics of most capital markets, and I know you think about this a lot more than I do even, but one of the characteristics is this centralization, right? The desire to have a market that has flows that everybody can track, which means that they get more and more centralized, because the question, as you're describing all of that people in our space would ask is, but is it scalable? Like, can then we roll these up into products that we can invest in? And one answer for me is just to say, why does that matter? Like, why does it have to be more money? Why can't it be that sort of doing the local cap, like, because, and I don't want anybody who needs more money should be able to be on a path to find it. I don't want to limit that. But I also want to say, as soon as we start designing things that can be scaled, that can be consolidated, that can be bought and sold on markets as tradable goods, means you have to standardize it all, which puts you back in this other place of it all has to look the same. And what we're really doing is designing things that work within a market structure versus we're designing things that work within a local context or a regional context, or, I mean, local very broadly, not like a small village works, but like it works in Lagos, which is, a massive city. So like saying it works in Lagos is not like a limited opportunity. It's kind of a massive opportunity if we design those things. But if it has to work in Lagos to be able to get to Luxembourg and then eventually get to the US stock exchange in some derivative product, then it has to be something different.
Oh, that resonates. I think our Gideas Foundation with Nicholas Koloff, they speak more about replicability of a model today than scalability. When you look at how hard it is to get a 1% non-performing loan rate on a $200,000 portfolio of agriculture investments in Nigeria, how hard that is to pull off, and how hard it is on the risk side of things to scale. You do ask yourself a lot of questions around, okay, you're dealing with some of the most challenging environments out there, right? Rural environments, and you're putting so much pressure on an intermediary to scale, and you're saying, oh, as an institutional investor, we can't work with you until you can do 2 million or something. Don't break the genius. It's like the person has figured something out that is absolutely huge. You're working with people who, in agricultural contexts are on the edge of poverty and have completely different sort of ways of interacting with risks, and their incentive structures are changing all the time, and they're constantly under threat. So your processes and your relationships are so important, but it's okay if they're not scalable right away. Within the regulatory process, we really try and create very broad frameworks, very almost kind of principles-based frameworks rather than rules-based frameworks, because of the sheer need for flexibility for these frameworks to be truly inclusive and adaptable and responsive. And so, I don't think there's a perfect regulation. What we do sort of encourage is that the learning process is ongoing, right? That we bake into the regulation the ability to actually change it on a sort of frequent basis and adjust it and tweak it, and look at, if it comes to sort of, if you look at the case of investments, crowdfunding, if you were to take a kind of Western-centric approach, you'd be like, oh, we've got to have a platform, and then the platform has to get bigger and bigger and bigger, like a republic, or Seeders that became a republic, and then it's going to consolidate, and then it's going to become investable, and then it can list it on the stock exchange or something. That's not at all the view that we would take for designing these regulations. We would rather have a much broader variety of intermediaries be enabled in many ways to use sort of an infrastructure, a common infrastructure. We would not regulate the platform. We would not ask the platform to do all the things, because the risk management part, which is so critical for retail investors, is a real kind of domain of mastery, and the intermediaries know best, and it is so unique between from one model to the next. And so we want to make sure that our regulations are really enabling that intermediary before we start thinking about imposing any sort of rules on the infrastructure.
I think what I love about, I don't know, maybe it's just your brain, Elizabeth, but the work that you're doing right now is that it's looking at, I don't know, not the sexiest bit of the system of looking at regulatory frameworks and currency exchanges and the sort of the technical aspects. And so you're looking at these very, very specific technical things in order to spur really creative innovation, right? And I think that's in some ways the what I see as the real gift that you're bringing to the ecosystem right now is to say we need to deal with the technical pieces that are taking away from the possibilities of innovation, of an imagination, of people actually designing for the right thing. Because we could all say people should design for the right thing, but the power dynamics around that, the power dynamics to comply with the capital markets the way they sit right now, especially if you're trying something new or you're not, this isn't your fifth fund and you've decided to try to experiment in your sixth fund or seventh fund. Like, if you are just saying, I am trying to figure out how to do this because I think I'm onto something, the constraints, the way that the power dynamics in the market put constraints on people's imaginations are undermining the very thing that they would say they're trying to spur, which is more capital moving to businesses that are bettering Africa. And if they care about jobs, or they care about women, or they care about agriculture, or they care about the environment, whatever it is within that. But I think this sort of bubble that you hold, the space that you hold, that is looking at some of these looking at the mundane to be able to enable much more profound imagination. Thank you. It's just really cool the way you look at those things. So
thank you. No, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. And I think what you've just said about, letting people's imaginations and creativity and innovation run a little bit further down the road before they get clumped down. For me, that is kind of the track record. And, the hardest thing in the regulatory space to hold the balance, right, not to flip it into sort of expensive compliance territory, is to figure out how you can build trust between these amazing people that we have in our ecosystem and our key stakeholders like regulators. And there's such a long history, sometimes a painful one in some markets, where trust has been broken and things haven't been understood, that it is a long journey to get to a point where regulators feel comfortable and safe making certain trade-offs that would allow more intermediaries to try more things and and be sustainable themselves and replicable. And that's a long journey, and it's really challenging to articulate that to the foundations and the donors out there, to get them to commit to sort of 5-year-long programs, for example, to actually build these relationships. And there's so many headwinds in the policy and regulatory space because of the shared sort of dominance of norms and rules and standards that have been decided, well away from the realities of this continent, that become what's known as best practice. All of the trainings and technical assistance and support given to regulatory authorities comes from the world, and the idea is for them to adopt these best practices. And it's very hard to then go say, well, actually, this big practice is in conflict with your mandate for financial inclusion. I think there's a wonderful organization called Senfree that talks a lot about KYC norms, right, coming from the Financial Action, FATF, Financial Action Task Force, I think. They're the ones that do the blacklisting and the grey listing, whatever, of jurisdictions, money laundering and all of that. And KYC itself can be a very excluding norm, right? You excluding potential individual investors on the basis that they don't have, levels of verifications that, are required. So, there are a lot of headwinds in that space. And it's, like I said, we can't get to a perfect regulatory framework, but I'm really excited about places where we have been able to make progress, and the private sector adoption is much higher when you do take an ecosystem approach. And, that's why I think communities like the Way Group and others are so important as sort of interfaces of sorts between private sector and regulators. And it's just the constant trust building that is what enables us to have conversations and, bring down the walls a little bit.
Reflecting on where this is all landing for me in this conversation is, what if we thought about pipelines of trust and track records of imagination? And we really started saying, what are we, and then sort of measures of adaptability to context and all of those kinds of things. If we valued them, that's the pipeline that we need to be building of those kinds of, because in the end, what makes markets work is trust. And when that falls apart, it's just we've learned to trust a certain kind of thing, a kind of largely Western standard of this is what you should trust in a market. But that isn't true everywhere. And it's not even true in some like global construction of the West versus not the West. Like I can name all kinds of places where trust is very local and is understood only in that context. And these global markets have just messed with it. And so I'm not one who's going to say we should do away with global markets and all that kind of piece, but I do think this, how do we build a pipeline of trust and a track record of imagination could shift what we valued in the market.
I love that.
Thanks for this conversation.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your work.
Yeah, we could do that for a while. A little love fest here. Thanks so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Joy.
To learn more about our work, visit us at criterioninstitute.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your reviews help our podcast reach a wider audience. Thanks for listening.